Thanks everyone for stopping by and welcome to today's webinar, 4 Fatal Mistakes in a Shifting Market with MAPS coach Kristan Cole and her co-host Joe Quattrucci. I'll make this short and sweet. Please note this meeting is being recorded. I will share the link in the chat momentarily to the MAPS YouTube channel where the recording will be available within 24 hours. Currently, everyone is on mute. However, we do value group participation, so we ask that if you have any questions for your coaches, please type them into the chat box below. Following the meeting, if you have any questions about today's call or other coaching programs, please feel free to email us at fasttrack, FASTTRACK at kw.com. That's all for me, Kristan and Joe. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, we're super excited to get started today. And, as Gary Keller says, and also John Maxwell, anytime you've got a shifting market or something changing or a gap in the market, make sure that you're, as Gary would say, the prophets that you follow are people who are seasoned and who've been through it before. So while I don't know all of the answers, I've been a realtor and I have been a broker for 38 years. And I have been through a lot of shifts. I was sharing with Joe yesterday, the shifts always are very similar on how they react and what we need to do. Their names are just different. So they can be called 9/11, they can be called the financial meltdown of 2008 or the oil meltdown in 1989 or the pandemic. I mean, you can put any name on it, or right now, the challenge with affordability and interest rates and inflation. But they kind of all act the same, and so do we.
Sure.
So today we want to talk about 4 things that you absolutely want to avoid in a shifting market to position yourself to not only get through it, but thrive on the other side. So the first thing I want to talk about is becoming paralyzed. I was even talking with somebody early this morning about the fact that some of their team members are kind of paralyzed. They don't know what to do, so therefore they do nothing.
Right.
Which is the worst thing that you can do.
Right.
So
the analysis paralysis, and we've all maybe experienced that in different parts of our lives, where there's so many possible things to look into or to research or to make decisions around that we end up looking at all the decisions we have to make and we don't do anything. We look and we analyze and there's no actual action being taken.
No, there's analysis paralysis, right? So the number one thing is I want to share with you is leave no lead behind. So if you have one thing that you want to do instead of not do, you don't want to get paralyzed. Instead, leave no lead behind. What do I mean by that? Joe, where do you think the loneliest place on the planet is Monday at 8 a.m.?
Probably a real estate office.
A real estate office. Good guess. Good guess.
Yeah.
Because no one's there. And right now, what I want to say to you, and I can just tell you that I started in real estate in 1984, and by 1989, a house that I had sold, a 3-bed, 2-bath, double car garage for $250,000 was now worth $25,000.
Wow.
So you want to talk about a major shift, major meltdown? I'm from an oil state. I'm from the state of Alaska, and so when oil went from $100 a barrel to 10, so did the housing market.
Right.
80% of our economy is based on oil, so it took a massive turn. But here's what I did because I didn't know any better. Is that I showed up and I said, you know what? I don't know what I need to do. I know I just need to keep doing what I've done and probably do more of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I stayed in the game. So when people didn't show up or they stayed on the sidelines or they want to talk about this market sucks. And in my small little town, we went from 400 agents to 36.
Wow.
In a short period of time. So it allows you to take territory because
right.
You're the only one showing up. Now it means it's probably going to be some hard work.
Well, I want to touch on that for a second. Gary Keller talks about that phenomenon you're describing in the book Shift, and he talks about the law of equilibrium. And basically what that says is the more potential earning income in a particular market, the more licensed agents there will be. And as the ability to earn income in that market begins to go down, as so does the number of real estate agents. And that's what you're describing. Now, for the people that are serious about real estate in this call and are making a career out of this, that's very good news for you, because what that means is over the next couple of years, you're going to have far less competition in your market from those part-time agents and hobbyist agents that are going to be getting out of the business and leaving all that additional market share there for you to capture.
Let me just share one other thing too, because it really gets into the fundamentals of real estate. the last 10 years, my mantra has been, you don't put anybody in your car that hasn't come in, done a buyer's presentation, signed a buyer's agreement. That was my script and role play. Like, don't take unqualified people out to see houses. That's ridiculous. You know what? Right now, when I say leave no lead behind, if they call and want to go see a house, get in the car and go show them the house.
Right.
At least show them one or two, then maybe have the conversation. But speed to the lead right now is going to be critical. And what Gary would say is, if you leave a lead unconverted, somebody else is going to convert it.
That's right. And that includes what we would call old leads. And I like to we refer to these, Kristan, as seasoned leads.
Seasoned leads. I love that.
Because if they were an internet lead 2 or 3 years ago and they decided not to buy because there was no inventory, or maybe even they tried to buy unsuccessfully, right now might be that pivotal moment where they're ready to make a new decision and get back into the market. So even if you think leads are old, no, if they haven't made a real estate change since you acquired that lead, there's still a good quality lead to be followed up with consistently until you are able to qualify their real estate needs.
And we're going to talk about follow-up in a minute. I want to make one more point about this leave no lead behind. The other thing what I want people to see, and Gary shared this with us last month in his top 400, and that was this. There's a difference between being a peacetime real estate agent and wartime real estate agent. So in peacetime, we're like, come in, sit down, let's do a buyer's consult. And he says in wartime, it's like, put the people in the car and go show them a house.
Right.
So just put your war hat on. It's speed to the lead. Don't leave any lead unconverted. Go show them the house, even if it's, for the first one, because that speed to the lead and speed right now to taking action is going to matter, because you're probably going to have to take action on twice as many people than you have before to get the same result.
And that's sort of the theme of this whole first thing to avoid around getting paralyzed is taking the action. And you all know exactly what action to take. If you've been doing real estate for any amount of time now and you've had any amount of success, you know what those income producing activities are, right? They're verbal conversations, face-to-face conversations, relationship building and follow-up. And so what Kristan, I hear you saying is that as things begin to evolve, that is still the priority. You just may have to do more of it to get the same result.
What I'm saying is the path of lead generation never changes.
Right.
However, just the small difference between, I'm not going to go show them a house until they come and have an appointment with me. Just, you may have to shift that right now and go show them the house. Have the conversation after.
There you go.
So it's just those nuances. The lead generation is still the path. And we want to put you in front of the lead as fast as possible.
That's right.
So let's, and I think about this and everybody we do have an affordability issue in this country right now where the price of an average home is over $400,000 or the median. And that creates an affordability issue. We all think 6% is like super, super, super high and bad. When I got into real estate, the interest rate was 14%, and I still sold 36 homes that year because I didn't know any better.
Right. You were working with what you had in the market and you weren't outthinking yourself.
And you have to realize that was with no technology.
Right.
So no cell phone, no fax, no computers. You don't have any idea what that looks like.
You said fax?
No fax machine. We don't even use fax machines anymore. But the point was is that I was willing and I showed up every day and I put in the work. Right. There's going to be some work during wartime. You're a military veteran. You served your country for 10 years. Wartime mentality. Does that mean sit back, have really pleasant conversations, sing Kumbaya?
Of course not. No.
Right.
The term that comes to mind that we use in the military is when things get tough, you always fall back on your training. When things get complicated or difficult, you always fall back on your training. So the question we should be asking ourselves is, what's the level of our training? And when we think about our training, what's the most important thing to be focused on? The way that we communicate, scripts, dialogue, practicing the way we communicate the value, the way that we communicate the shifting market, what it is, what it means for a buyer, what it means for a seller, and the different options they have available to them. That 100%. High level of communication is the one skill that I'd be really focusing on developing, because as things become more difficult, you will fall back to that training to help you survive through this process.
So the second thing in a shifting market that we really need to pay attention to is maybe a complete overhaul of our systems. And what I mean by that is, yes, lead generation is lead generation. It's always the path, but fall back on the lead generation mechanism that you know is going to give you a predictable result. Meaning you may have to make more phone calls or knock on more doors. Go back to, like you just said, fall back on the training that you know.
Right.
And also, you have to remember 91% of all realtors, all of the 1.6 million realtors have never been through a shift. 91% of them.
Okay, so I'm not alone in this.
No.
This is my first big shift. I'm not alone.
Right.
9 out of 10 agents haven't.
But the point is, whatever you do, don't go follow those people because they've never been through this together.
That's a good point.
Gary always says, follow a proven leader. The leader needs to show up, be visible, overly communicate, and have a proven plan.
Yeah.
So go follow somebody that's been through this before. So as an example, when you think about systems, do you have a system that will allow you to communicate with your seller over the next 3 or 4 months? And most of you are going, what are you talking about? 3 or 4 months? It should sell quickly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there is actually a market that I lived in for years where the average time on the market was 5 or 6 months. So do you have a system in order for you to communicate with your clients in a very systematic way so that they know that you care about them, you're communicating with them consistently? Because what's the number one thing that we hear from clients in a market where houses are on the market for more than 24 hours? What do they usually complain about?
Why hasn't it sold yet?
Yeah, and my realtor never does what?
Markets it or promotes it
or talks to me.
Or keeps me updated. There you go.
Exactly. And so do you have a system in place that's going to remind you to sequentially and often communicate at a high level? Because remember, I said, as a leader, whether you're leading just yourself or you're leading a team, the leader needs to show up, be visible, overly communicate, and have a proven plan. So if you're overly communicating with your seller and you're sharing with them, and oh, by the way, let me set the expectations. Our next step, if the house doesn't sell, is this, Joe.
Got it.
So overly communicate and have a proven plan that builds confidence in your clients, whether it's a buyer or seller. So go ahead, Joe.
Well, just to touch on that, I really want to make sure that the point is being driven home here, because when you have that conversation with the seller, you're really doing 2 things. Number one, you're communicating to them, and you're communicating to them the fact that you're going to continue to communicate them throughout the process. You're also setting an expectation that in this market, it may not be like your neighbor or your friend last year. It may very well come to a price adjustment or a price improvement, or it may very well come to 4, 5, 6 weeks on the market. And so you're simultaneously setting the expectation around the feedback we're going to get from the market and the way we're going to interpret that feedback, and the fact that no matter what happens, I will maintain a high level of communication with you so that you can always stay informed and make the best decision possible to achieve the outcome that you want to achieve.
So setting the expectations up in the listing appointment, and then letting them know how you're going to communicate and how often you're going to communicate and what your commitment is to them. That is critical. Most of us have on this call, 90%, 9 out of 10 agents have never had to do that. They don't have a plan in place. So go into your command, go in there and build a smart plan around communicating with your sellers.
That's right. I want to touch on one more thing. You were talking earlier about following a proven leader, and what you're describing is this idea of modeling, right? And all modeling is looking for somebody who's already achieved what you want to achieve and doing what they do. Right? That's the most simple example of modeling. Now, we obviously want to model the activities. If we wanted to take that concept one step further, I would say, are you modeling the thoughts that that person is having and the feelings that they're having? Meaning, how do they think about lead generation? How do they think about following up with a contact? How do they feel when they're picking up the phone or going on a listing appointment? Find somebody that you can model, but don't just model their activities. Model the way they think and feel and their daily behaviors, and that will help you achieve the result that they get.
Yeah. So when I went through my first shift, let me just tell you, it was difficult and I was scared to death.
Sure.
I was 26 years old. I had 3 kids. And I mean, when a house goes from 250,000 to 25,000, you call me and you want to sell your house that I sold you 3 years ago, that's not a fun conversation.
I imagine not, right?
And it was really scary. But what I can tell you is that Gary says 2 things. Most money is made in a down market. Most millionaires are made in a down market. And having gone through several shifts since then, I can tell you that most of my wealth has been created in a down market. And so now I actually get excited about a shifting market because I know we're going to take territory and I know all of our people are going to make more money.
Well, that's certainly a different frame of mind than the first time.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, 100%.
Right. Which obviously that frame of mind then impacts the way you feel about what you do all day, which then in turn impacts what you actually go do. It's
funny because 2 days ago, there was an agent here in Arizona who runs a fairly large team. And he called me and he said, "Are you scared?" I said, "No, I'm not, not at all. I'm actually excited because I'm following a proven leader in Gary Keller.
Right.
He has proven systems and models that work. And all we have to do is just show up and do the work."
That's right. And just one more thing on that reminds me of this idea of control. And I think, Kristan, and correct me if I'm wrong, part of the reason you're not as concerned this time is because you know what you can control and you know you're going to follow through.
Right.
We can't control supply and demand. We can't control interest rates, but I can absolutely control what I do from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed.
100%.
And what I do with that amount of time is absolutely going to determine my results. Whether I like those results or not, I am 100% responsible for whatever it is that I create.
Yeah.
And so that sort of mindset allows you to not be afraid because you know you're going to do the activities.
Yeah. And for anyone on this call that's thinking, "Oh my gosh, a buyer's never coming back to the table. Interest rates are so high, the affordability issue." Let me just remind you of one thing that Gary showed us during the vision speech. 24% of all sales last year were from people who bought in the last 3 years.
Interesting. Yeah. That's a lot more than you would expect.
Right. The point is people are always going to be needing to buy and sell. We have to just go find the willing, the people that need to buy and sell, which means we may have to call 2 and 3 times more people than we've ever called. So if you're willing to do the work, there's going to be plenty of work out there. You just have to show up, suit up, and be willing to do the hard work.
There we go.
One other thing I would say with systems is we need a follow-up system. Most people think the key is making calls every day. And the truth is if I call today and get an appointment, that's kind of lucky. And I'd rather be lucky than good. I'll be honest. I'd rather be lucky.
But it is lucky.
It is.
You haven't called the right person at the right time.
Exactly. But the truth in this business is that the system that you have that requires you to follow up is where the gold is. Mm-hmm. Because in that follow-up, then that person is actually going to raise their hand when they're ready to buy and sell. That's the reason you're making the calls every day. It's not because you expect the result that day, but if you get it, isn't that awesome?
Sure.
It's because you are creating a system and a communication network so that when they are ready, they call you. So the most important thing we do in this business is follow up.
Yeah.
But most people go out and try to get new business every day rather than following up with the people they already have.
Or the other challenge is they try to remember to follow up with people.
You can't. You've got to have a system around it.
Because when you're contacting 20 people, you might be able to remember. But when you're contacting 20 people a day for 7, 10, 15 weeks in a row, you're not going to remember all those conversations, who to follow up with when, or what was even discussed. So that's when we start talking about systematizing follow-up using, of course, a CRM, right? KW Command, for example, or whatever it is that you use. And I remember on stage, I heard Gary Keller talk about a CRM. And I just want to give this quick example because it really resonated with me. He described, just from the audience real quick, did your grandmother call you on your birthday or your aunt or your loved ones, right? Typically, like those closest to you always remember to call you, right? I always think of like my Nana, right? I've never had a birthday that she didn't call me. And Gary Keller talked about this exact example, and all the, a typical grandmother might do is have a list of everybody's birthday that they keep in the drawer, and they look at it from time to time. They see whose birthday is coming up, and then they call them on that day.
Right.
That's all a CRM is.
Right. Right.
We've just taken it, and obviously now we're relating that conversation to real estate, and the command system is just designed for you to note when it's the right time to follow back up. And so I like that very simple example of what a CRM is, because it doesn't have to feel complicated. It doesn't have to feel like advanced technology. It's a reminder system.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that reminder system, you should be providing value to sellers. Like, it's a different mindset to think that you need to help set the expectation of your sellers to go create an offer to the buyer. You guys are probably thinking, what is she talking about? Well, having lived through enough shifts, I remember the days when we had a seller and I would call and follow up with the agent. How did the showing go? And you would tell me something like, they love the house, but hate the carpet. So I would talk with the seller and come back to you and say, if the seller is willing to replace the carpet in the house, are your buyers willing to make an offer? That's where the seller is actually making an offer to the buyer.
Interesting.
We haven't done that in so long, it's ridiculous. But that But those are the things, that's part of a system, is creating that value and helping the sellers making those offers back to the buyer.
So negotiating is all about bridging the gap between the buyers and the sellers.
Mhm.
And what I hear you saying is the last couple of years, it's been easy depending on this. If you're representing the seller, bridging the gap has been fairly simple because the buyers are the ones that have been doing a lot of the bridging.
Yeah.
But now what you're saying is even if you're representing the seller, you may have to be willing to have a conversation about how do we bridge the gap between what your client wants and what my client wants. And
100%.
here's one suggestion or one possible solution to that challenge.
And so being a great negotiator and understanding some of those concepts, go hang around some of those old dogs that have been through several markets that can help you with those negotiation skills so that you are the expert. So number one is leave no leave behind. Number two is make sure that you overhaul your systems, or really probably create systems that you've never had.
Right. Don't not have systems.
Yeah. So have systems around communication, around expectations, around follow-up, around value, so that you are that expert. Number three would be, most people in a shift, they avoid looking at their money system.
Well, because I don't love what my money report is telling me, so I'll just avoid it for a little longer.
Yeah, that doesn't work very long, Joe. So
Right.
you know, when I say do a complete overhaul on your money, and I taught this a few weeks ago, where I took one of our credit card statements for our business, and I showed how I call it the red, the green, and the yellow. So the red is I'm cutting that cost today. So I call that the fat, like the things that just accumulate over time that you really don't need, that have shown up as a reoccurring thing on your credit card statement that you need to cut.
It's a luxury or a convenience
Yeah.
or something you forgot you even had,
Right.
that kind of stuff.
Then yellow would be what Keith Cunningham, who wrote the book, The Road Less Stupid, would say is the muscle. Sometimes you got to cut the muscle to survive. And that may be something that you enjoy or want, or it's really great to have inside of the business, but it's still not something that's critical to the business's success.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk about that in a minute when we get to capacity, the last one. And the third one is green, and that's your bone. Don't ever cut the bone. If you do, you're going to limp a long time.
So what are some examples of what might be green on this profit and loss statement?
Your main lead generation mechanism. So don't cut, maybe you have a triple dialer so that you can make more phone calls.
Good example. Yeah.
Gary says, never cut training, never cut coaching.
There you go.
Because during the shifting market, you need to be being coached by a proven leader who's been through this before, so that they can help you understand where's the fat, where's the muscle, just don't cut the bone.
Right.
And so really looking at your expenses and getting rid of expenses that are not necessary, or reallocating expenses. Sometimes it's reallocating to the doubling down on the thing that's absolutely a known proven quantity.
Right.
Because remember, when you're at war, you're not in growth mode anymore. When when you are in peacetime, most of us go into growth mode and spend more money.
Which makes sense.
But when you're at war, you've got to make sure that the business survives, because if the business doesn't survive, it doesn't matter.
Right. And what I've heard you say in the past around this is, let's say you cut all these expenses and then you continue to do great. Perfect. You just have a bigger profit margin.
That's right.
But if things do slow down and if your income does decrease, then you're going to really appreciate cutting these expenses sooner rather than later.
So you've heard me say it many, many times. If I'm wrong, it's going to be awesome. And if I'm right, it's going to be awesome.
Right.
Because there's no downside to cutting your expenses.
Right.
Just make sure you're not cutting the bone, which is your main lead generation, get up and get it done every day. Like, you need a car, you need a phone, you probably need a triple dialer. There's some things that you need so that you can double down on the business that's important and that's going to help you through this. So just remember when you're completely overhauling your money system. Right now, I have my bookkeeper sending me every single invoice for me to look at. Here's why. Most of us go, oh, cell phone, but yep, I need a cell phone. But when was the last time you called your cell phone provider to find out if you have the least expensive plan? When was the last time you called your insurance agent and said, I want you to rebid all of my insurance policies?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I mean?
Right.
Don't just take it as a given because, oh yeah, it's insurance, I have to have it on my house.
Right.
But do you have the right insurance? Do you have you shopped it in a while? I just did this not that long ago and saved $3,200.
Wow.
Just by doing that one thing with insurance.
So even if it's green or yellow, when I do my profit and loss review, I'm still going to look at the green and yellow and say, is there a better product, a better service at a cheaper cost?
Or
I might have to call.
Or can I get it to zero?
Ooh, zero cost base. Tell me about that.
Can I get someone else to partner with me on it? Can I get a vendor to partner with me on it? Can I get it to zero?
Can I get a sponsor for this event?
Correct.
Can I get my title company to pay for this catering or these flyers to be printed? Or maybe I share a triple line dialer with another agent in the office.
Yes.
There's all kinds of possibilities.
Who might be calling at one time of the day and I call another time of the day.
Right,
So,
right.
Don't just look at an expense and say, yes, I need that. Well, could you get it to be less expensive? Could you actually get it to zero? So don't just accept the expense,
Right.
Examine it.
I want to dive into something you mentioned very briefly a few minutes ago, which was not cutting training and coaching. I'd love for you to spend a couple more minutes on that. What do you mean? What are some examples? And why is that so important for us, not only as the individual agents, but as leaders of other agents?
Well, like I said, 91% of the agents have never been through this market. So without someone leading, coaching them and training them about how to get through it and how to survive through it to thrive on the other side. If you've never done it before, why are you going to go out and reinvent the wheel?
Right.
Why don't you go follow a proven leader, a coach who can mentor and train you through it so that you do thrive through it. And it's not as scary when you're following a proven leader with a proven plan.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of this idea of accountability. And Gary talks a lot about this, and basically the fact that we all perform better when we have some layer of accountability. And that's sort of universally true for people. It looks like, is it Masha has a question? Go ahead for Miami. You can go ahead and come off mute if you like, if you had a question. Maybe not a question.
I think we have to manually unmute her, Joe, because everybody was muted. So give me just and I'll do that.
Yes, I was speechless.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Quick question. Is there any classes or any trainings that you personally recommend?
I couldn't hear what
Classes or trainings that we would recommend
for the shift?
Yeah, I would say, most market centers right now, I'm an OP of 6 market centers, and we are 100% spending our time on the tools that are going to help our agents the most, which is how do you have the right conversations and how do you have the tools in your tool belt to pull out and have those conversations. So I would look at your market center training calendar, your PC program.
And the shift book.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they're going to be focusing on the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And the conversations, it's like anything else. Lead generation is still lead generation. That's still the path. But the conversations, we were talking about it yesterday, the messaging and the conversations compared to the first quarter of the year are completely different.
Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind is the actual book Shift itself, right? That Gary Keller wrote. And we actually just did in our market centers a 4-part series on the book Shift, and we'll be doing several others. So that would be a good resource. And like everything, take it with a grain of salt. There's going to be some stuff you read in that book that you feel like is maybe no longer relevant or it needs to be updated. So you're going to take all that and you're going to use those 12 tactics that Gary outlines as sort of the foundational mechanism that you're going to build on top of and begin to create these changes in your business.
And the fourth one, and I'm going to hit it real quickly, so if there's more questions, we can answer them. And that is, you should examine your capacity. What does that mean? It means your talent. Meaning, if you're a single agent, maybe it's just you, maybe you have a part-time person. If you have a team, you really need to look at who you have, who you need, and who may need to go. Because remember, we're thinking war versus peace. In wartime, you need to have people on your team that can execute. This is not growth mode. So don't have people on your team right now that want to go create some new program. That's for peacetime. We're at war. And so right now you want to make sure that every person that you have that you either directly or indirectly have around you needs to be able to execute on your systems, period. So if they are not an executor, they just want to create all these new programs, wrong people to have on your team right now. So, Keith Cunningham says this in his book also that, examining your capacity. So he would say, examine your systems, examine your expenses, and examine your capacity. The only thing I added to this is making sure that you don't leave any lead behind. So those are the four things that I think most people avoid when there's a shifting market. They wait too long to cut their expenses. They wait too long to examine their systems. They figure out we don't have any systems and my seller just fired me. They wait too long to examine their capacity. Who do they have on their team? So don't wait for those things.
Right.
Get on them right away, because like you said, some of the times we want to avoid what the bank statement says,
Right.
But we want the business to not only survive, but thrive. Remember, Gary says in a down market, more millionaires are created than any other time, and we want it to be you. So what questions do you have with us for the last couple of minutes that we have remaining?
Any questions? You can either use the chat box or feel free to raise your hand and we can have you come off mute. Either one is fine. Any questions about shifting markets, strategies, anything at all that comes to mind so that we can best serve you here with these last few minutes?
And I'd also just say, we're going to start a class in August. It's an 8-week class that teaches you really how to scale your business from this wartime perspective and what's important and how to double down on those things. So if that's of interest to you, it's once a week for 8 weeks that we're going to be going over these in a lot more detail. And I'm sure Tegan will type in the chat box how you can register for that. So that's another a point of access for you to learn what I've learned the hard way over 38 years of experience. And like I said, the first one go around was not pretty.
Right.
But I survived and was able to thrive out the other side because I did survive.
Exactly.
I wasn't trying to thrive. I just was trying to survive it. And by surviving it, I came out the other side and really doubled my business.
Absolutely. One other resource I want to throw to you, I was actually listening to the Gary Keller podcast, Think Like a CEO, this morning, and you mentioned Keith Cunningham's name a couple of times. He was actually on the very last episode of last season with Gary, talking about tactics during a shifting market. And in particular, they were talking about some of the COVID related things. However, it's still all super relevant. So I just thought I'd bring that up since we brought up Keith Cunningham several times. Check out Gary's Think Like a CEO podcast.
Yeah, it's an excellent podcast. I've gone back and listened to that entire series more than once.
Yeah,
because they're tried and true principles that don't change. The only people that change is us. And Gary says it's natural when we come out of a shift and we go into more peacetime. These are Garyisms that we do start to spend more money and we start to grow. Right now, it's just really time to be tactical and super purposeful about our money, our people, and our systems. And we need to get up and show up every day.
Absolutely.
Be prepared. So any questions in the chat box?
It doesn't look like we've had any questions in the chat box, or at least none that have not already been answered by other people in the chat box.
Graham, is there any other instructions, or Tegan, that we need to let them know about?
Yeah, I shared. We're doing for being nice enough to take the time to come today, 15% off registration through that link for the program. Launches on September 7th with Kristan and Joe for 8 weeks. See if anybody else has a question. I saw somebody said they couldn't unmute themselves and wanted to make sure. Lynn, if you wanted to raise your hand, we can help out, unmute you. And
there was also one question I just found, Kristan. Can you elaborate on how millionaires are made during downtimes? You touched on it earlier, but maybe a little bit, some examples around that.
Yeah, great question. Most people get frozen with fear when the market starts to slip. I call it jumping the curve. The way you jump the curve is that I always consider myself a buyer. As you know, I've bought 31 doors in the last 12 months. As recently as a month ago, when interest rates went up. Most people, when things like this happen, they become paralyzed and they stop investing. Mm-hmm. Well, if you stop here and the market goes to here, how do you know when it bottoms?
There's no way to know.
There's no way to know other than historical data. And so if you're buying all the way down, you love this graph, the trend line over time.
Yeah.
If you're going to live in a house at least 10 years, it always comes back to the trend line.
Right.
So that means 4% growth year over year over year over year. So whether I buy here or here or here or here or here, it's always going like this.
Right.
So if
Over
your
long
time-
periods of time.
if your time horizon is longer than a couple of years, I mean, you're buying for an investment to keep, and it's going to provide cash flow for you, it always comes back to the trend line.
There's no way to
always
lose.
there's no way to lose. Most people stop buying in a down market. The way that during the first down market is because I had a good credit score, I could fog a mirror and had, I mean, you know, it was, banks were getting money, properties back hand over fist. But I started small. I started with a 4-plex, and then I bought a 6-plex. It was 6-plex with a gravel pit. And then I bought a commercial building. It was like, I just stayed in the market and found pockets of opportunity where there was a place to put my money. And trust me, I didn't have a lot of money at the time. I had time and I was willing, but I didn't have influence and I didn't have money. So I say it's the people that have set aside money that can now be a buyer. That's how Gary says you become a millionaire, is because you actually have prepared for this market and you have the money to continue to buy and grow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we had another quick question while you were describing that, Kristan. Chad wants to know, he's a single agent. He was looking to add at least one agent by the end of this year. Mm-hmm. Is that still a good time to do this?
Well, sure. And here's the caveat. Do you have so many leads that are falling through the cracks? And or are you in a place where you have all the business you want?
Right.
So if either of those things are happening, because sometimes people don't want more business, they want more time back, and there's no wrong that's not a wrong answer. So what happened to me, Joe, is I remember one day where I got an offer in on one of my properties, and I looked, and it was a buyer that was in my data bank that I had contact with. They had written it with someone else. Somewhere along the way, it fell through the cracks, right?
That stings a little bit.
That was painful.
Yeah.
Really painful. And so what I learned from that is I didn't have any more capacity left. So if I was going to grow, I needed another person.
Right.
That's when I made my first hire.
And just a quick comment on that. Remember, just for everybody on the call, remember the MREA model, right? The first and second hire you typically make, if you're following that model, are administrators, right? It's an admin, and then it's a TC and a marketing person. And I mentioned that because, like Kristan said, you shouldn't be bringing on more agents to your team unless you have more leads than you can possibly handle and you've maximized your bandwidth, or you're doing enough business and you're just like comfortable and you're like, you know what, I've got all these excess leads that I don't care about converting. But for most people, the reason that's important is because the cost of sale you're going to pay another agent to go convert that lead and pay that lead, you're going to get paid a lot less money profit margin wise than if you hired an assistant to help you create a system so that you managed all those leads. So
Joe, you bring up a good point. So my first 3 hires were all admin.
Right. There you go.
And so I did not hire a buyer's agent until I was doing about 17, 20 million with me and those admin. And then I hired a buyer's agent and then I just focused on sellers. So you're right. Every time I made a hire, I actually grew my volume by about 4 million. So I'd make jumps and jumps and jumps.
Because they gave you back capacity and bandwidth, and you paid them a lot less than the revenue that was created by $4 million of volume.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it allowed me to grow.
A couple more questions that keep rolling in now. What's the one activity that you recommend leaving here today that individual agents should focus on in this shifting market right now?
I'm going to be honest and give you the hard answer that probably nobody wants to say. There's not one shift that I've ever been through that people haven't had to make at least do twice as many activities, sometimes even almost 3 times as many activities to get the same result.
Yeah.
That's just the truth. I wish it were different, but it's not. So you might have to say, family, I'm going to have to go to work earlier and stay a little later in order for us to maintain the lifestyle that we have. And I want your support with that, because that's exactly what it's probably going to mean.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of the idea of an activities-based results, right? You mentioned blind luck earlier. That's one way to get a result. The next way is an activities-based result, meaning you do the activity enough times until you get the result you want. And what I tell agents is if you don't have the sales pipeline that supports your income goal, it's because you're simply not talking to enough people. You're not doing enough activities to lead to that result. Well,
and you're of something really important. And I will say this, ask people for help. It would go like this. Joe's a seller. Hey, Mr. Seller, this is Kristan. I've always told you that if the market's shifting, I'm going to be giving you a call and making sure that you're aware of exactly what's going on, right?
Sure, absolutely.
So here's what's going on in the market, blah, blah, blah. And Joe, you know what? Today I'm calling to ask you for your help. Would you be willing to help me?
Sure, how can I help?
Well, you've been a great seller. I need more nice sellers like you. This is a really rough market. Who do you know that I should be talking to that could be a nice seller like you, that I could help just like I helped you?
Let me write you a list.
You know what? Ask them for help.
Right.
People will want to help you.
Yeah.
But if you say to them, Joe, I need your help.
Yeah.
I need some more nice sellers like you.
Right.
Who I can help get where I helped you get.
Right.
Would you be willing to help me?
Absolutely.
Do you think anybody's going to say, no, I'm not going to help you, forget you?
Well, it's like they're not sitting around all day thinking about the lead generation portion of your business. It doesn't even occur to them to give you a referral unless you ask for it.
So when you ask them, especially in a market like this, and you say genuinely to them, I need your help, would you be willing to help me? People will help you. I guarantee it. The other one is to say, you know, Joe, I don't know if you know it, but 50% of all the business I did in this past year was because really great clients like you referred business to me.
Mm-hmm.
And right now this is a really tough market. And I'm sure looking forward to, can I ask you to keep doing that and helping me out?
Sure, absolutely.
That's amazing. I can't tell you how much me and my family appreciate that. Being honest and candid, you need their help and they'll help you.
Do you have recommendations on how to communicate with our sellers during the weeks their property is on the market?
You have to set the expectation up at the time you list the property. Here's what we're going to list it at. And ladies and gentlemen, when the market is like it is, we don't know if it's going to go flat or if it might go negative. We don't know that, but here's what we do know. The market's like a slinky going downstairs. You have to stay in front of it or you're going to be behind all the time. So what does that mean? That means I'm going to be calling you every Monday, Joe, and I'm going to be sharing with you what happened this past weekend because the market is moving super fast. The market we have today is very different than just 30 days ago. So Joe, I'm going to be calling you every Monday and I'm going to be interpreting and sharing with you what's happening in the market so that we can make the best decision for you and your family and stay ahead of the market. When the market's going up, you can price up here. When the market's going down or flattening, you need to price ahead of the market.
So you're talking about new inventory that's competition, recently sold homes that are competition, the overall number of units and all of those stats.
Back on the market. 15% of all homes came back on the market.
Right. Okay. So you're reviewing all that information with them.
Yeah. And so, but you have to have that conversation up front so that they know. And Joe, by the way, if we're getting no showings, then we really need to think about repositioning if you absolutely have to sell right now, because we're missing the mark if we're getting no showings.
Because there's something that your Denny Grimes says all the time, which is there's no such thing as a well-priced listing that doesn't sell. If it's well priced enough, it's always going to sell, no matter what the market is like. And so when you list the home, you look for the market feedback, and feedback is number of showings, number of offers. And you tell the client in advance, the market is going to tell us how they feel about the price of your property. And here's how we're going to know. If in the first 2 weeks, we don't have any showings and any offers, we know we're 4 to 6% too high or somewhere in that ballpark. If we get some showings, but no offers, no real traction, we're probably 2 to 4% too high on our listing price. And so again, you're setting expectations on making price adjustments in advance based on the market's feedback.
Now, going back to systems, we actually have a graphic where we created exactly, it's a fishing graphic.
Yeah.
And where we've put the hook in the water so that we can explain, show versus tell. So that's a system that we have. And so we explain this at the time we take the listing so that when we need to have the hard conversation, we've already set that expectation. Setting expectations, ladies and gentlemen, is huge. The other thing I would do is if bold is coming to your neighborhood, I would take bold. I've taken bold over a dozen times. Why do I still take bold? Because I'm still learning.
That, and it makes you do the activities. And that goes right back to the accountability. Nobody wants it, but we all perform better with it.
Absolutely. Great questions.
I think we have one more and then we'll wrap up.
All right.
As it pertains to interest rates, how do you position your conversations with hesitant buyers in this particular market?
The one thing I do is I pull out the graph that Gary showed at Family Reunion, which is the one we just talked about, the historical graph of pricing. And Gary, you see on the graph that you can look at any 10-year period of time and the pricing always comes back to the trend line, meaning it always, even if it goes down, it always comes back. So if they plan to live in the house the next 8 to 10 years, buy the house. And I used to say, buy the payment, not the price. Now I say buy the payment, not the interest rate. Can you afford the payment? If you can afford the payment, just remember this: if you stay a renter, you're paying 100% interest. Let that settle in. You're paying 100% interest if you stay a renter, because you don't get the advantages of the other legs of owning real estate, meaning being able to reduce your taxes, being a price appreciation over time, depreciation, which allows you to write off some of the assets of the property so that you pay less taxes. Writing off the interest.
Right.
Those are things that you get to do that you don't get to do as a renter. And so if you plan to be an owner for more than 8 or 10 years, buy the payment, not the price.
There you
buy
go.
the payment, not the interest rate. Can you afford the payment? That's the question. If you can afford the payment, don't stay a renter. Renting is going to do nothing for you.
There was a quick question about whether or not to continue doing marketing in this environment. And my response was marketing can always supplement prospecting, right? So Gary would say prospecting based, marketing enhanced, meaning you can do some of it, but my recommendation was pay attention to ROI. If I'm spending $100 a week on Facebook ads, I need to be able to track back the commission I've earned as a direct result of Facebook ads. And if I'm not getting a 4 to 10x return on that money, I should probably find a new place to park it. So the answer is, yes, you can still spend money on marketing if that's part of your plan, but make sure you're holding your dollar accountable to a return. And that requires you, in essence, to be able to track your spend and your return.
And that gets back to accountability and a system around accountability.
some trends I'm noticing in this conversation.
Exactly. And the truth is, we look at our production numbers, we look at our expenses, we look at our money every single Friday. We might have a bad week, but we're not going to have a bad month because we're paying attention.
Checking the gauges.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we would love to help you this fall, build a foundation around building your business, even through a shifting market. If you want to join us, it's been our pleasure to add value to you today. Thank you for attending. And if there's anything else we can do for you, support@thekristancolenetwork.com, and we'll answer your questions.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye now.